Welcome to Friday at Story and Song. Now, this isn't just your normal, regular, rainy, damp, wet, miserable Friday afternoon. I am faced with sunshine before me. We actually have an audience tonight, just like we did last Friday. I mean, this is just the most incredible thing possible. And I guess everybody heard that my dear friend Arlene is going to share some reminiscences with you relating to one of my favorite authors, Rick Bragg. And I'm kind of pulling out a series here of readings from him, by him, about things that happened in his version of the South. And it seemed to me that it's fine taking an author and repeating his words, but I decided a dose of the horse's mouth is what we needed. And my favorite horse is sitting next to me.
And my favorite horse's
Arlene
friend is sitting next to me.
Oh, by the way, this is not scripted. So you're going to be surprised as we are with what actually comes out.
That's true.
Now, as for what Rick Bragg was discussing, it was the cookbook. That's the cookbook I wish I had read years ago, because it's more stories and a little bit of procedure and a little bit of content, but the cooking is what leads people to the full realization of who they are, where they are, what's happened in their lives. Really an extraordinary concept. And Arlene and I were talking in one of our favorite meeting places, Publix, and our carts collided and we chatted. Because, you know, we are of a certain age, and it took us a little time to focus on who was in front of us and who was behind us. But we did, nonetheless. And when I was telling her about what I was doing, she said, "Oh, I have a story." That's the worst thing you can tell me. Because if you have a story, I want to share it. And I know you all want to share it. And with that introduction, I would like to welcome you to Arlene Filkoff, who has served in many capacities in our community in ways that have substantially made us a much wiser and gentler place to be. And she continues so to do. By the way, I'm also charter member of Arlene's fan club, and we'll discuss options later. Mm-hmm. Now, Arlene, with that introduction, I want to know about this Mississippi girl with a Louisiana mother.
All right, I'll be happy to tell you about my Louisiana mother. I'm sure you're wondering why she ended up in Mississippi in the first place. So let me just give you a little bit of background about how my parents, him from Washington State and her from Louisiana, ended up in Mississippi on the Gulf Coast, which there's very little left of, by the way, these days. My father was overseas going through a divorce. It was World War II. And my mother, whose father had passed away and left her in the care of his brother in Mississippi, was working for her uncle and going out frequently with her two cousins. There were three women, Ella, Ina, and Eva. They were a brunette, a redhead, and a blonde. And every branch of the service had a debarkation point at Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi at the time. So they were having a grand old time. Her cousin, who happened to be a man and who was in the same company as my father overseas, knew that she was writing letters to soldiers who were stationed overseas. My father had been through a divorce, which I wasn't told about, by the way, until after he died, but he had been through a divorce and was upset about it. So my mother's uncle said, "Oh, please write to this man." Now, she had a dresser drawer filled with index cards of folks that she was writing to, so why not add another one? which she did. They wrote for 4 years. The pictures that they exchanged, my mother sent one to him. Again, she was a blonde. Her picture was lit from behind, so it looked like she was a brunette. It was a black and white picture. The picture my father sent to my mother, remember those little brownie cameras that took a picture about that big? Well, he was one of 14 people in that little picture that big. So what he did when he came home from overseas was send her the money to take a train from Louisiana to Washington State, where his family lived. Now, I'm telling you right now, if I had said to her, I've been writing to this guy for 4 years and I'm going to go on a train all the way across the country to go see him and see what it's all about, you think she'd let me go? Absolutely not. But she got on that train, she went up there, and they got married 6 weeks later. But when they got to the train station in Tacoma, Washington, Daddy was waiting downstairs and Mother was waiting upstairs. And he had just about given up that she wasn't there. So something made him take a pass through the upstairs part of the train station, and he recognized a brooch that he had sent her from Germany. And that's how they even got together in the first place, because they certainly would never have recognized each other from the photographs that they had exchanged. Now, Washington was kind of depressed after World War II. And my dad was a certified, licensed, bona fide, genuine, whatever you want to call him, butcher. That's how he made his living. My mother's family in Mississippi offered to have them come there, open a grocery store, and they would help them get started if they would come to Mississippi. Well, the first way that played out was that they ran a meat market for one of the cousins who already had a grocery store. And the one story that I heard from the rest of the family about the way my mother dealt with the customers in that meat market was, the man came up, Ron, and said, "I'd like a nickel's worth of cheese." And my mother said, "What do you want to do, smell it?" So she didn't win a whole lot of friends in that part of the business, so they decided to go to a different grocery store, also run by the family. Now, this one was owned by the family. They gave them the whole shooting match. You can run this. And we, the three of us, lived in a little, what they call a shotgun house. Does everybody know what a shotgun house is?
But tell us.
Okay, a shotgun house is built straight. So you walk through the living room to get into the bedroom, to get into the kitchen, to get into the laundry porch in the back, which is what we had. Everybody got to go through everybody's bedroom if they were going to go eat in the kitchen, right?
And
Yes.
the fact of the matter is, when you opened that front door, you could pull out your shotgun, pull the trigger, and that bullet wouldn't hit no one except anybody who was standing in the path there.
Exactly.
But
Now,
it would then end up in the backyard.
Now, my family was pacifist, so we didn't know anything about the guns. But
Oh,
of course,
okay.
Ron knows about the guns. At any rate, that's why it was called a shotgun house, apparently, because you could shoot through it. Wow. So they ran that grocery store for a little bit, and then my dad bought his own. And he and my mother decided at a very early time in that time period that they really could not work together anymore. They could not at all. It happened the day that my mother was working the cash register. My father was working the meat market. It was nobody else working in the store. A man came in, said to my mother, "I'd like to buy some stuff on a tab. I just want to put it on a tab today." And Mother knew the man. She said, "I don't think we can do that today." So the man went all the way around the store, went back to the meat market and said something to Daddy. And then I see my father, I'm 6 by this time. I see my father go, "He's going to get this on a tab, okay? Don't worry about it." And my mother said, "Okay. You come up here and you check him out on that tab." And she picked up her pocketbook and she got me by the arm and we left. And she did not go back for a week. So my mother was a pretty feisty, pretty adventurous type person, especially when it came to cooking. So when Ron told me that he had been reading Rick Bragg and the stories about his cooking, the first person that popped into my mind was my mom. When she was living in Washington State, she had learned how to cook from watching her mother. And everything in Louisiana involves seafood. Also in Mississippi involves seafood. So she's living in Washington, and the neighbor in the apartment building said, I'm going to the fish market. You want me to get you anything? And my mother said, yeah, get me half a dozen crabs, because mother's going to make a gumbo. She's Cajun French, right? The woman said, have you ever seen the crabs in Washington State? And my mother said, well, no. And she said, well, I think they're bigger than the ones you're used to. And mother said, well, all right, then 3. The woman came home with 1. And I think mother was so afraid of it, she didn't cook any of it. But it was a pretty big crab. Now, she didn't get that adventurous with the crabs, but she did with other things, because she never, ever, ever used a recipe for anything. And she would say to me, it's easy. First you make a roux. Well, I don't know what a roux is. And then she taught me what a roux is. That's the only extent of cooking she taught me, was how to stir the roux until it was the right color. Do you know how long that takes? Forever. So by the time I was finished stirring that roux and she said it was ready, I didn't want to learn how to cook anymore. So I didn't bug her anymore. Her gumbo was incomparable. Nobody else in the world cooked gumbo the way Eva did. It was always different, though. You never knew what went in it and what didn't. It was sort of like whatever was in the kitchen or whatever was in the refrigerator is what went in it. And she would vary the ingredients, too. Ask her how to make a gumbo, she gives you a list of ingredients, not amounts, not how long to cook it. You got a list of ingredients. So when Ron and I were talking about this, I went back into her recipe box. There were actually 2 of them. And I managed to get those away from my wicked stepmother when she was taking over the house. So I have the recipe boxes at home. Now I say boxes because the papers that are in them are a combination of index cards like these, the back of a check like this one, or just a piece of paper where she had started writing people's phone numbers on it, and then there comes a recipe. So I have this mixture of these things. Now, the 2 most famous cooking stories for me and Mom were, my grandmother used to make, in Louisiana, they make something that's called a sweet dough pie. I don't know if you've heard of that or not, but it's basically the crust is sweet. The taste of it when it's filled with a like a fruit preserve, the taste of the crust is like a fig Newton crust. And what they do is make this crust and they wrap it around whatever the filling is. So it can either be a custard filling or a fruit preserve filling or, banana cream or whatever you'd like the filling to be. My grandmother made these things and I love them, but my grandmother lived in Louisiana and now we're in Mississippi. So I said to Mother, I really would like for you to make sweet dough pies. Well, now you see you're talking serious, because now you're baking and you've got to use a recipe because it's a little bit more scientific when you're baking. So we traveled over there to visit my grandmother. It was a 6-hour drive back then. There was no interstate highway. And she told my grandmother that she would like for her to make sweet dough pies and she would write it down. So she did. And Mother wrote it down. And then she went home. She started making sweet dough pies. 12 of them. Because my grandmother made sweet dough pies to sell. So she would make 12 at a time. And my mother had no idea how to change the recipe, right? So every time my mother made sweet dough pies, her brother, who lived in the same town we did, would get on the phone and start calling friends and saying, Eva's making pies, come on over, come on over. She went out and bought Tupperware was her favorite thing in the world to buy a lot of. And she went out and bought these pie towers that stacked up like this to store her sweet dough pies in until somebody came and got the whole pie. Or somebody would come and get half a pie or just a piece, have coffee, stay, sit, you eat, you'll feel better was a famous thing to be heard in my house. So as I was looking through these recipes, I come across 2 cards that each say sweet dough pie. Now, it's not the pie, it's the crust, and it's just for one crust. This one is from Avia Myers, who Mother liked a lot. They were related to each other in some God knows way, but they liked each other a lot, so she had hers. And then this one is from C.C. Myers, who was her first cousin. And she didn't much like the way he cooked. But I think what she wanted to do was try to compare these two and see if she could get just one pie dough. To my knowledge, it never happened. But she's got written over here on the side, add as much flour as will make the dough stiff. Oh, okay. Now, these 2 recipes are pretty different. One of them has 2 eggs, the other one has 4 eggs. And my guess is that she looked at that and said, not even going to try it. Then she decided she would make candy. Well, you also have to be pretty precise when you make candy. This check has her recipe for fudge. It says 2/3 cup of oil or less, 3 cups of sugar, salt, tiny, tiny bit.
You all know what that tiny bit is, okay? Just check it.
Yes, 1 cup of pet milk, 1/2 cup of cow's milk, 1/4 of a block of butter. This is my favorite part. Almost cook it. Add vanilla when ready to beat it. That's the extent of her recipe and her directions. Now, donuts. Donuts are good. Love donuts. There's not anything on this list of ingredients. It's got the amount. It says 2 eggs, a cup of sugar, 1/4 cup of shortening, cup of milk, 4 cups of flour, 4 teaspoons of baking powder, 3/4 teaspoon of salt, 1/2 teaspoon of soda, and 1 teaspoon of nutmeg. Doesn't say what to do with any of it. Now do you understand, husband of mine, why I'm not a very good cook? Okay, all right.
It's just a pinch of this and a pinch of
A
that.
pinch of everything is what it
And
is.
you pinch me, you're in trouble.
Now, after I had gotten married, I decided I was going to entertain people. So, my mother was a big person to entertain lots of people in the house. She always had parties of one kind or another going on. And she loved, loved, loved to make different kinds of dip, especially with seafood. So she had made for a party in her home this fabulous crab meat dip that people were just clamoring over getting this dip. So I wrote to her, because back then we still wrote letters. I wrote to her and asked her if she would send me the recipe. Now, I don't know what I was thinking when I asked that question, but I thought, well, she didn't make this up, so somebody told her how to do it. She sent me a list of the ingredients. So it went like this. It went crab meat, parsley, green onions, condensed milk, cheese. That's it. So in digging through her recipes, I actually found 2 different recipes for crab meat dip. This one you would never know was crab meat dip because the thing at the top says Fitzpatrick. Now, I don't have any idea who Fitzpatrick was. Rafferty and a phone number. I know Mr. Rafferty because his son is now the mayor in Pasquotank, Mississippi, so I know that. But I don't know whose other phone numbers these are. It says cream sauce with cornstarch. Beat yellow. Now that becomes apparent what that means next. Add sauce to yellows of eggs. Add whites of egg, beaten, and then salt and pepper. Add crab meat, heated, and fold in mushrooms, buttons, or stems and pieces, parsley, paprika. This one has actually a little bit more information, but the priceless thing that I thought about this one was, here's a list of all the ingredients. You turn it over and it says hot. You're supposed to serve it hot, not cold. So actually, in following my mom's recipes is more like a detective story. You know, it's James Patterson or something like that, trying to figure out what the heck did she mean.
Well, you didn't tell me she was a physical therapist, because you have to stand in your head to read the hot.
You do, and she could have been one of those too. My mom was only 58 when we lost her, and I really feel like we missed out on the next incarnation of what she would have been as a cook, because she used to love to watch Graham Kerr. Remember the Galloping Gourmet? She thought he was hysterically funny because he cooked the way she did. First you take a leak, right? She thought that was hysterical.
Don't tell that to an old man sitting next to you.
So at any rate, my mom did get a chance to cook for my oldest daughter, and actually my youngest daughter, but she wouldn't remember it because she was only 10 months old when Mom passed away. But I believe that by keeping these things and by reading them to all of you and looking at them occasionally, as I do, I think her cooking stays alive that way. And my sister and I occasionally will try to make something that Mother made, and it never comes out the same way. It never, ever comes out the same way, but we talk about her a lot when we do it. So I think that's enough for her. Okay. I do.
Well, Arlene, thank you for sharing the stories, and you can see why. I felt it's fine to have Rick Bragg, but why don't we, each of us, look at those little collections of recipes and see the people that are brought back to life, and what wonders can happen out of a kitchen. After all, that is the ultimate gathering place. And I don't remember where I read this, but I think it's quite apropos. Cooking is love. And I really think cooking is love. And you've proven it, Arlene. Well, we're going to close for now. And I think afterwards, one of the joys of technology, we've got Connor sitting beside us here, telling us what to do when and being very technological. We're going to close because we've had our 30 minutes allotment, but we're going to ask some questions of our audience, or allow them to ask questions of Arlene if they so desire. And maybe somewhere down the line, we might put a little addendum to this program of questions from the audience. It's such a joy to have an audience. Thank you, everybody who's on the other end of the spectrum of digits out there in Never Never Land. Thank you for all the people who are actually corporeal and sitting right here in front of me at Story and Song. We'd so look forward to talking to everybody again next Friday, when we will be having my buddy Rick Bragg telling you about some ornery chicken. Now, I'm not going to tell you anything else about that. Thank you, folks. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, Ron.